What is the id?
It's an obsolete term. I'm afraid once used to describe the elementary basis of the subconscious mind.
Monsters from the id.
Huh?
Monsters from the subconscious.
Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes, or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. So please subscribe when you're finished listening. You can also go to classicmovierev.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Today's movie is Forbidden Planet 1956. Let's get to this point right away. This movie is based on The Tempest by William Shakespeare. Yes, that William Shakespeare. I will go into that a little more later on. This movie has a decent 7.6 rating on imdb.com and a 98% rating on RottenTomatoes.com. Not too shabby. It was nominated for the Best Effects, Special Effects Oscar in 1957. Also, the film is listed in 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die, edited by Ian Hayden Smith and Stephen J. Schneider. It produced one of the top 3 robots of classic sci-fi, Robby. Of course, the most famous is Gort, Klaatu Barada, whatever. And the other 2 are Robby and Class B-9-M-3 General Utility Non-Theorizing Environmental Control Robot from Lost in Space 1965 to 68, who was known simply as Robot or The Robot. Most people can't tell the difference between Robby the Robot and The Robot. Robert Kino Shada, who designed Robby the Robot, also worked on Lost in Space. This was the first science fiction movie to be filmed without any part of the action taking place on Earth. The soundtrack is very unusual, consisting only of electronic notes. The gold lame miniskirts were great too. Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
Anne Francis played the pure planet dweller Alteria Morbius, known as Alta. Francis was first covered in Blackboard Jungle 1955. Richard Anderson was Chief Quinn, one of the planet's visitors. He was first covered in 7 Days in May 1964. Earl Holliman played the cook or cookie, a man with a penchant for booze. Holliman was first covered in the film noir The Big Combo 1955. James Best was an uncredited background crewman. Best was first covered in The Caine Mutiny 1954. Walter Pidgeon played the role of the mysterious Dr. Morbius. Pidgeon was born in Canada in 1897. He studied voice at the New England Conservatory of Music, but left for Hollywood, and he entered silent movies with Mannequin 1926. Talkies were no problem for this vocally trained actor. He did a few musicals and was basically relegated to second leads in films like Saratoga 1937, The Girl of the Golden West 1938, and Dark Command 1940, which featured Claire Trevor, John Wayne, and Roy Rogers. On loan out to Fox, he was given a starring role in How Green Was My Valley 1941. Back with MGM, he was given more important roles, but was often stepped on by the greatness of his co-stars, as in the case of Blossoms in the Dust 1941, Mrs. Miniver 1942, and Madame Curie 1943, where he was overshadowed by Greer Garson. Pidgeon received an Oscar nomination for Mrs. Miniver 1942, but I have to admit, she's better to look at. Pidgeon continued to work in fine films such as Command Decision 1948 with Clark Gable, The Bad and the Beautiful 1952, Dream Wife 1953, and Hit the Deck 1955. He took from 1956 to 61 off to work in theater. I feel he did his best work when he returned with movies like Forbidden Planet 1956, These Wilder Years 1956, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea 1961, and Advise and Consent 1962. Pidgeon retired from film and television in 1977. He died in 1984. Leslie Nielsen played Commander Adams. Nielsen was born in 1926 in Saskatchewan, Canada. Another great American actor. Canadian. Initially, Nielsen studied at the Academy of Radio Arts located in Toronto. He then moved to New York, where he became part of the neighborhood playhouse. Nielsen really had two careers. The first, the serious one, began on television in 1950. He was in Ransom 1956 with Glenn Ford and Donna Reed. His first big role was Forbidden Planet 1956. Other movies include Tammy and the Bachelor 1957, The Sheep Men 1956, again with Glenn Ford, Night Train to Paris 1964, Dark Intruder 1965, The Plainsman 1966 as George Armstrong Custer, Beau Geste 1966, Counterpoint 1968, and Dayton's Devils 1968. He was also prolific on television during this same time period. Sometime during the 80s, he changed to a great comic actor. His movies during this period include Airplane 1980, Soul Man 1986, The Naked Gun, Files from the Police Squad 1988, The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear 1991, Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult 1994, Dracula, Dead and Loving It 1995, Spy Hard 1996, Mr. Magoo 1997, Not Funny, Scary Movie 3 2003, and Scary Movie 4 2006. Nielsen died in 2010. Warren Stevens played Lieutenant Doc Ostro. Stevens was born in Pennsylvania in 1919. He joined the Navy at the age of 17. While in the military, Stevens became interested in acting. He was a Marine Corps pilot during World War II. Following the war, he began working stock, on the radio, and joined the New York Actors Studio. Stevens' role in the Broadway play Detective Story led to a successful television and film career. He had a few movies that stand out. The films include The Frogman 1951, Deadline USA 1952, The Barefoot Contessa 1954, Women's Prison 1955, The Man from Bitter Ridge 1955, Duel on the Mississippi 1955, Forbidden Planet 1956, Madigan 1968, Striker Ace 1983, and Samurai Cop 1991. Stevens died in 2012 at the age of 92. Marvin Miller was uncredited but provided the voice of Robby the Robot. There also appears to be a false rumor about this being the first movie of future Love Boat 1977 to 87, Captain Gavin MacLeod. However, IMDb.com states that his first movie was I Want to Live 1958. A special thanks goes out to everyone that's left a review. I want to encourage anybody else that's interested to go over there and do the same. Check the website for more details on the ABC Film Noir reader that's coming out in October. Story.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
The movie begins aboard the United Planet cruiser C-57D. It is late in the 22nd century and they have been away from Earth for over a year. The narration says they are capable of faster-than-light travel.
In the final decade of the 21st century, men and women in rocket ships landed on the moon. By 2200 AD, they had reached the other planets of our solar system. Almost at once, there followed the discovery of hyperdrive, through which the speed of light was first attained and later greatly surpassed. And so at last, mankind began the conquest and colonization of deep space.
They are traveling to planet Altair 4, which is the fourth planet in the system, to investigate what befell an Earth colony left on the planet. The saucer commander is J.J. Adams, Leslie Nielsen. He runs a taut ship and everything is by the book. The ship is being controlled by an astigator globe thing. The same globe was used in the background when George was listening to the information rings in the Time Machine 1960. Adams briefs the crew that they are getting ready to decelerate. They stand under and above circular discs that look suspiciously like early Star Trek 1966 to 69 transporter pads. They are bathed in green light like the aliens shot in Independence Day 1997. However, these pods function like the tubes in This Island Earth 1955. After coming out of deceleration, the pilot, Jerry Farman, Jack Kelly, has flown them almost directly into the star. Adams orders Jerry to plot a course for the fourth planet. He reminds the crew that they are looking for evidence of the Bellerophon scientific expedition, which arrived about 20 years earlier. They slow again and Jerry takes the ship into orbit. Adam briefs them on the good air and gravity on the planet. Cook, Earl Holliman, complains that there is no booze, women, or pool halls. They check for signs of life and Chief Quinn, Richard Anderson, monitors the radio. They can't see or hear anything. Quinn says they are being scanned by radar, but he can't pinpoint the location. Just then, the ship is contacted by one of the Bellerophon expedition survivors, Dr. Morbius, Walter Pidgeon.
Spaceship, identify yourself. You're being tracked.
Cut me in, sir. United Planets Cruiser C-57D, J.J. Adams commanding. Who are you?
Morbius of the Bellerophon.
Who?
Edward Morbius.
Yeah, here it is. Morbius E, Ph.D., Lit D, Expedition Philologist.
Philologist?
What do you wish here, cruiser?
Well, you don't understand, sir. We're your relief.
Morbius is not happy that the ship has come. He tells them they should not land. Adams has to do his duty, and Morbius gives him landing coordinates. Adams lands the ship and orders the men to be armed and maintain security. The sky on the planet is green. This is a tribute to When Worlds Collide, written by Philip Wiley and Edwin Ballmer in 1933. It's also a great movie titled When Worlds Collide, 1951. When the ship lands, it has a regular stairway, not one of those safety ramps or central elevator types. The crew deploys security, and shortly after they see a high-speed dust cloud coming towards him. They realize it is a vehicle coming and are surprised to see it is driven by Robby the Robot. Robby speaks in English. In fact, he speaks 187 languages with their various dialects and subtongues.
Welcome to Alta 4, gentlemen. I am to transport you to the residence. If you do not speak English, I am at your disposal with 187 other languages along with their various dialects and subtongues.
Colloquial English will do fine, thank you.
That sounds suspiciously like C-3PO, who is fluent in over 6 million forms of communication. Robby is tasked with taking some of the crew to Morbius's house. The cook wants to know if the robot is a male or a female. Adams, Farman, and Doc, Warren Stevens, get into the vehicle. Seems like a pretty standard landing party, minus some red shirts. Robby makes them wear seatbelts, long before it was the right thing to do. They arrive at the home of Morbius. He is waiting at the door when they arrive. Morbius invites the crew in for lunch. Robby is the chef and makes raw material into food. Replicator, standard Star Trek technology. Then Morbius begins a weird demo of Robby. First he shows his blind obedience by asking the robot to put his arm in the disintegrator, but stops him short. He then asks Robby to blast Adams, but the robot shuts down on the illegal command. Morbius revokes the kill command. Morbius says he built Robby. Then he shows the house defenses, which are just steel shutters. Morbius says all the others on the Bellerophon expedition were killed in the first year except for him and his wife.
Seen how comfortable I am here? No hardships, no special difficulties, and no need at all for military assistance. Now I dare say you're impatient to get back to base.
Yes, sir. The moment we've interviewed the other members of the Bellerophon party.
Others. But there are no others, Commander. Before the first year was out, they had all, every man and woman of them, succumbed to a sort of a planetary force here. Some dark, terrible, incomprehensible force.
He says his wife died of natural causes. The others were ripped apart by some unseen force. 3 more were killed when they tried to take off in the ship from the planet. They asked Morbius why the force has not attacked in the last 19 years. He doesn't know. Suddenly, Alta, and Francis walks into the room wearing a super short miniskirt.
Alta, I specifically asked you not to join us for lunch.
Father, lunch is over. I'm sure you never said a word about not coming in for coffee. Well, did you or did you?
This was the first miniskirt worn in a major movie, and it resulted in this movie being banned in Spain until 1967. Shocking. Alta is Morbius's daughter, and she has the attention of all three crew members. She talks about the beauty of the men, and they are a little shocked. Farman jumps in and begins his courtship. He warns Alta to stay away from Adams. Alta has her friends. She calls them with a sonic whistle. Some deer and a tiger appear from the garden. The tiger appears with a tonal note and might be a mental creation. Alta pets the tiger. The garden, which is set to remind the viewers of the innocence of the Garden of Eden, is actually the forest from the Munchkin village used in the filming of The Wizard of Oz, 1939. Adam gets a call from Quinn, and he sees that they are safe. Adams tells Morbius that they must contact Earth for new instructions. Adam says he will have to build a transmitter and use ship parts to get the message out. He estimates it will take at least 10 days. Morbius is horrified. Morbius asks if 2-inch lead shielding will help and says Robby will run it off in the morning. They should have gone with transparent aluminum. It's very quaint. The crew heads back to the ship, leaving the worried Morbius and the happy Alta behind. In the morning, they begin removing the ship's engine to power the transmitter. Robby carries the steel shielding with one hand. Robby says it's isotope 217 and only weighs 10 tons. Alta is waiting in Robby's rover. Farman goes right back to work. For humor, they pick up Cookie with the magnetic lifter. Quinn has the transmitter assembly ready. Cookie sneaks off to meet Robby. Cookie pulls out his bourbon and Robby pours the last shot into his synthesizer and burps.
Well, if you could tell me where I could get a hold of some of the real stuff.
Real stuff?
Just about one jolt left. Oh, genuine ancient rocket bourbon. See here? Hey! Well, you low-living contraption, I ought to take a can opener to you.
Quiet, please. I am analyzing. Yes, relatively simple alcohol molecules with traces of fusel oil. Would 60 gallons be sufficient?
Gallons? Mister, I've been from here to there in this galaxy, and I just want you to know you're the most understanding soul I ever met up with.
Robby asks if 60 gallons will be enough. Farman takes Alta into the forest for kissing lessons. He says it's required for good health. She is totally unstimulated. Adams catches the pair and is pissed off and jealous as well. Adams tries to explain to Alta that her clothes are causing problems with the men. She gets defensive and he gets mad. Alta complained to her father about the way Adams looked at and talked to her. Morbius is alarmed by the male competition. Alta orders Robby to make her some new, more modest wear. 2 guards are outside the ship that night, and they hear breathing but don't see anything. Whatever it is enters the ship and destroys some scientific equipment. Adams is all cranky with the men. Quinn says he can fix everything except the klystron frequency modulator. Adams says, so it's impossible. How long will it take? Classic Scotty. Adams is sure Morbius is behind the attack and he and Doc get ready to leave. The captain refuses to let Farman come along. At Morbius's house, Robby is putting out fresh flowers. One of the monkeys from the jungle comes in and gets an electrical jolt. Robby tells the crewmen that Morbius can't be disturbed when he's in his office. Adams sees Alta swimming in her jungle and she appears naked. She comes out of the water and is wearing sheer clothing and then dresses in her more modest gown. Adams is a little embarrassed and flustered.
You always look just beautiful.
Then why don't you kiss me like everybody else does?
Everybody?
She doesn't understand why he doesn't kiss her like everyone else does. Finally, he gets around to the kiss. She responds better than she did with Farman. The tiger roars and leaps to kill Alta. Adams kills it with his ray gun. Eden lost. Adams goes back, and I think he tells Doc that he had sex with Alta. When Adam touches Morbius's office door, it opens. They go in and they find a strange form of writing on the desk. Another door opens and Morbius enters. He is upset about the intrusion into his private space. Adams all but accuses Morbius of the sabotage. Morbius begins to explain the story as he understands it. He tells the crew that a people called the Krell lived on the planet. He believes that the Krell visited Earth and brought back the animals that are now on the planet. Morbius says they were 1,000,000 years ahead of Earth. He says on the verge of their greatest achievement, the civilization vanished in a single night, 2,000 centuries in the past. All of their above-ground remains have long since vanished. There would have been different animals on Earth 200,000 years ago. Morbius takes the two men on a tour of the Krell underground facility. Their metal is impervious to blasters. Morbius shows a complete library and says he has only a rudimentary understanding of their technology. Even so, he was able to construct Robby. The next device they examine is a device for educating Krell children. Morbius attaches 3 sensors to his head and sends the indicator about halfway up. Morbius then uses the machine to show an image of Alta. The doc takes the next test and barely gets a reading of 1/3. Adams is a little less. Morbius tells the machine killed the Bellerophon captain and put Morbius in a 1.5-day coma. When he returned to the machine, his IQ had gone up significantly. Adams asks why the machines all look new and is told by Morbius that the machines are self-replicating. Morbius shows a wall of gauges that are set in a series but with no wires. When he turns on a machine, it only affects the lowest display. Morbius then shows them one of 400 air shafts for the 9200 thermal reactors.
I'll show you a section of one of the power units. These units are sunk in the body of the planet, 50 miles right below our feet. Now, be sure and look only in the mirror. Man does not behold the face of the Gorgon and live.
That are working below ground in an 8,000 cubic mile complex with 7,800 levels. So a lot of power. Back at the ship, Foreman and the men have completed an electronic fence. Cookie asks to go outside of the fence to look for wild vegetables. But he is really meeting with Robby to pick up his 60 gallons of bourbon. Robby begins to detect something. The invisible attacker hits the fence. Soon, large footprints are shown moving towards the spaceship. It enters the spaceship, depressing each step as it travels. A scream comes from inside the ship. Morbius and Adams are fighting over control of the technology. Morbius wants to send the technology to Earth as he sees fit. Adams gets the call that Chief Quinn has been violently murdered. The two men head back to the ship. Morbius says to Alta that it has started again. Doc has made a model of the footprint around the ship. It's both a biped and a quadruped, also a herbivore and a carnivore. It is a mixed-up amalgamation of parts. Adams has Cookie brought in for punishment. Cookie says he got drunk, but was with Robby the entire time. They hold a burial for Chief Quinn. Morbius and Alta are there as well. Morbius says he warned Adam not to land on the planet, and the next attack will be deadlier. Morbius says he knows by premonition. Adam sets up an updated perimeter with radar-controlled laser cannons. Foreman and Adams make peace over Alta. Suddenly, the radar picks up something moving towards the ship. No one outside can see anything. They switch the cannons to auto-control and they begin firing, but with nothing to see. Foreman sends 2 men forward. The monster hits the wire and its shape can be seen by the fire it's taking. By watching the attacking monster closely, you can see one of the inside movie jokes. The roar and the head movements that the monster makes are virtually the same as those made by Leo the Lion at the beginning of this and other MGM films. The 2 men that went forward are killed by the monster. Foreman runs forward and is killed also. Morbius is asleep in the Krell lab. The gauges on the wall are about 3/4 lit. Alta screams and Morbius awakes. The monster disappears when he wakes. Alta has had a dream about an attack on the ship. Back at the ship, they bury the 3 dead crewmen. Doc says the attacker is constantly renewing itself. Adams decides that he will evacuate Morbius and Alta whether they agree or not. He also wants either him or Doc to use the brain booster that killed the old captain and almost killed Morbius. Adams and Doc head back to Morbius's house in the tractor. The bosun is told to defend the ship but flee if the monster gets through the wire. Robby opens the door for them but refuses admittance. They draw on him and he neutralizes their ray guns. Alta cancels Robby's order and lets him inside. While Adams talks to Alta, Doc runs around to the brain booster. She wants Adams to leave without her and her father. She declares her love, and that's when he realizes that Doc is missing. As they head towards the Krell lab, Robby comes back carrying the weakened Doc. The Doc is awake enough to say that the Krell forgot about the monster from the id.
Morbius was too close to the problem. The Krell had completed the project. Big machine. No instrumentalities. True creation.
Come on, Doc. Let's have it.
But the Krell forgot one thing.
Yes, what?
Monsters, John. Monsters from the id.
The id? What's that?
Then Doc dies. Morbius comes out and is acting pretty insensitive. Since her father is so uncaring, Alta decides to leave with Adams.
What is the id?
It's an obsolete term. I'm afraid once used to describe the elementary basis of the subconscious mind.
Monsters from the id.
Huh?
Monsters from the subconscious.
Adams realizes that the monster is coming from the mind of a human. Every Krell on the planet let loose all of their inner beast at once. Morbius could not accept that he may be the source of the monster. Robby warns that something is approaching the house. As the invisible thing crashes through the forest, Morbius puts up his shields. The monster is making pretty easy work of the steel shutter. Morbius will not accept that he is the monster. He orders Robby to kill it, but the robot locks up with the conflicting command.
Stop it, Robby! Don't let it in! Kill it, Robby!
It's no use. He knows it's your other self.
The three humans run into the Krell underground facility. Adams wrestles Morbius into accepting the truth. The monster begins smashing through the door. Morbius finally realizes that his daughter may be killed. He begs his daughter to say she doesn't believe. The monster breaks through the door as all of the gauges light up. Morbius runs to the monster and denies it. The struggle is only shown through the gauges. As Morbius lays dying on the floor, he asks Adams to set the self-destruct sequence for the Krell lab. He says they must be 100 million miles away in 24 hours. Morbius dies. The next day, the ship is 98.6 million miles away. I don't know why they used human body temperature instead of 100 million miles. Robby is now the ship's astrogator.
98.6. We're clear now. What an astrogator.
A genuine privilege, Commander.
Activate main view plate.
Aye, aye, Skipper.
Adams and Alta watch the planet explode with all of the Krell knowledge. Adams tells Alta that her father's name will shine again. Notes: I've watched this movie about 20 times, and it just dawned on me that the first two attacks came from Alta, and she was trying to stop the men from leaving the planet, and the second two attacks came from Morbius. Before I get into the Tempest, I must mention that the mock-up flying saucer from this movie was used in the Twilight Zone episode To Serve Man 1962, so my wife can scream, "It's a cookbook." Also, Gene Roddenberry, creator of Star Trek 1966 to 69, was a big fan of this movie. It is believed by many that he got the Enterprise's call number 1701 from the time the saucer first entered orbit around Altair 4. Roddenberry's legacy continues with little tributes, like Altair 4 being shown to be a Federation planet in Deep Space Nine, 1993. The Tempest was written by William Shakespeare in 1610 or 1611. The play is a departure from what many think an Elizabethan play should be. The deposed King Prospero lives on an island with his daughter Miranda. He's aided by the magical Ariel and Caliban, the monstrous native inhabitant of the island. The play is extremely hard to understand, but it is quite obvious that the Shakespeare story shows some interesting parallels to Forbidden Planet 1956. There are many stories on the interweb, such as the one by Falcon Movies, that go into more details than I can, and there is a link on the blog post. First, The Tempest is set on an island, and Forbidden Planet 1956 is set on a planet, which could easily be viewed as an island in space. In both, the man lives alone with his daughter. Prospero is served by Ariel, and Morbius is served by Robby the Robot. Prospero can control the weather, and has Caliban do his bidding. Morbius created the invisible monster from his mind. When more people enter the, quote, islands, things rapidly change. Prospero starts out on a course of revenge, and Morbius is unaware he is creating the damage. Miranda and Ferdinand fall in love, as do Alta and Adams. However, Prospero accepts the love, and Morbius dies because he cannot live with the change. And of course, Altair 4 is destroyed. World famous short summary: don't create, steal. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I really appreciate you spending the time listening. You can find connections to social media and email on my site at classicmovierev.com. There are links in the podcast show notes as well. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All I ask is that you jump over to Apple Podcast and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.